despite being forecast to be dry last night, it rained cats and dogs. So even with the whole blast, this is still rusted now. What I'm going to do is give it a bit of a wipe first, get the bulk off. Comes off pretty easily, the bulk of the sort of surface rust. This may be rust, which I thought it was, but it's actually wiping off, so it may even be some sort of staining from the garnet that's on the deck here. Although the top deck here is not stained, so I think that's unlikely. So the phosphoric acid should make it go black. We'll let that dry, give it a good brushing again, and then we'll put the epoxy on. So my suspicion about it being staining rather than rust seems to be upheld by the fact that it hasn't gone black. It's actually cleaned back up to the sort of dull grey of the sandblasting. So it may actually, the acid may have actually just sort of cleaned that staining off through a totally different process than would normally happen with the conversion of rust. Anyway, let it dry, brush it off, get some paint on. Today I'm going to go around and put the spot filler. So this is an epoxy spot filler like this. It's a 2-part filler and it's a 1-to-1 ratio. Fillers that you see more in, say, the automotive industry have a very small amount of hardener. So this particular filler is a lot tougher. It's good for a marine environment. So with the pitting on the boat, I've pad welded as much as I can, replaced bits of steel where I needed to, and the rest of it now is just going to be filler to give it a bit more of a sort of aesthetic smoothness rather than being any structural repair, obviously. These seem to be about the same viscosity and sort of thickness, so make sure I get the right lid. So I probably could do the mixture by weight with some scales. Good way to go when you're mixing this sort of stuff. The obvious thing to do is just to weigh each container, see if they weigh the same to start with, in which case 50-50 by weight is a great way to mix this up. When applying this, probably the most important thing is to make sure you don't have air trapped underneath the filler. When you first apply it, you'll compress some air and you'll see that air kind of push back out to form bubbles. Break the tops of those bubbles, just keep applying it till they're not there. You know, filler's bad enough, the illusion of filler's even worse. Now this epoxy filler has dried on the transom. It's been dried for maybe 5 days now. I'm going to go get the random orbital sander and just smooth it off. Something larger, like one of those sort of agony boards, or maybe even a really mild. Belt sanders are really aggressive, but at least they have a large surface area. But I think just the random orbital will be fine. You know, we're not going for that gel coated finish. This is just trying to make it look a bit less pitted. Dave Brown from Altex has come today to drop off some more paint for me. Thank you, David.
Thanks, Chip.
I got his title wrong last time. David's actually the New South Wales manager for marine coatings.
Yes.
Right? Yep. So what we've got, actually we'll go back one step. David's brought me the urethane top coats, but last time we spoke I hadn't even sandblasted yet, and we got the epoxy primer on straight away just to stop that sandblast from flash rusting. Then I've here we go, put some of the spot filler on, which is an epoxy spot filler, and then given that a bit of a sand. Now I've got to do a little bit more, but David and I were just talking before about whether to go another coat of epoxy But you're saying I can go the barrier undercoat?
You can get a barrier undercoat, but whilst you're still you're wishing to put another coat of epoxy primer on the other side.
I am, yes.
So we'll continue with the epoxy primer.
So whilst you've got a batch made up, just go.
That's right. Once everything's primed, and this has got a very open window, which has been handy here because that's been a few weeks. So
it has, yeah, it's been a while. Yep.
When we go to the epoxy barrier undercoat, then we've got more. Let's count on a week in between.
Right, in between coats. So it's a much tighter time frame when we get into that.
That's right.
Okay, yeah. Now, so I will do another coat of the epoxy over the top of my filler then, and I can then have. So say for example, I then go, look, we've got some good weather coming up. What's the soonest I can then put the barrier coat over the epoxy?
2 hours.
Right. Okay. So pretty quick.
Yeah. And you can put 2 coats on in the one day.
Yep.
We'd say, look, don't put any more than 2 coats on because then you can have solvent entrapment.
Gotcha.
If you want to put 1 coat on each day.
Yeah, I think that's perfect. Just a coat a day is a nice way to.
We're not going to come back and say, oh, you've got solvent entrapment, you've got bubbling.
Gotcha.
So
if I did it sort of maybe waited till about 10 or 11 so that the dew's dried and all that kind of thing, and then it's also got the rest of the afternoon to dry.
Yes.
All right, I think that's the way I go. I'm just trying to think of all the questions I've got for you.
And that'll be more important too once we go with the polyurethanes too.
Right,
once the dew's gone and we want to have the rising temperature and the rising heat.
And that's the perfect time to put it on.
Yeah, not late in the afternoon.
Right, okay, so otherwise it might, as the sun sets.
That's right. And we want to also try and put that urethane on, not in the direct sunlight as well when we're actually doing the application.
So do the shady side of the boat.
Because the 2-pack polyurethanes, they're great.
Yep.
One of the main difficulties with them putting on is like if you're in direct sunlight and that too, because you're trying to keep a wet edge.
Right, okay.
With it.
Right, as you're going along.
That's right.
Okay, that makes sense. So, all right, so I'm going to put my last epoxy primer on over the top of here.
That's correct.
Then within 2 hours I can put my barrier coat. Now, I remember you saying that it's good to put your anti-foul on. So we're doing 2 things. We're doing our anti-foul down low and our polyurethane up high.
That's right.
So if I do my barrier undercoat, and then I'm going to say, right, we're going to do my final barrier undercoat very shortly before the anti-foul, I think you were saying last time.
That's correct. So you can press it with your
Yes,
thumb,
that's right, you're saying, yeah.
And there's movement.
And that's the perfect time.
But it's not sticking to your thumb.
Okay.
So generally that can be a couple of hours. It's definitely that day.
Yes, gotcha.
And it would probably be within about 4 hours.
So my other concern is I don't want to put the anti-foul on too long before going back in the water. So if I was to put so would I be better off actually leaving all the barrier coats until the last minute then? Because you're saying this can actually sit longer.
That's right. So once you've up to this stage with the epoxy primer, you've got more of an extended window.
Okay,
so once we want to start using the barrier undercoats, you may wish to do the barrier undercoats here, then the polyurethane.
Yes.
Finish that off.
Just do that side.
Then move to the barrier undercoats
and the anti-foul shortly before launching.
That's right.
Okay.
Now, there's a few other ways of going too, because we've got other products, the polyurethane undercoat. Say we had. So we wanted an extended time up here. We wanted a couple of months.
Yeah. Okay.
Then polyurethane undercoat.
So there are a couple of choices.
There are choices.
All right.
So altexboatpaint.com.
Yep.
The website. That's got the data sheets. And
yes.
They must be read. Because they will tell you, okay, for the end, we're going to need a 5mm roller.
Yeah.
That's the type of roller. If we're spraying, it's got the setups for conventional, airless, air-assisted.
I was asking David some questions before, and he was saying, look, the data sheets they put on the website tell you kind of everything, and I guess that's the critical thing. There's one little link, one PDF, and it says if you're spraying, if you're rolling, if you're brushing.
That's right.
What it is, times. So I'll dig all those out, print them all out, bring them in with me.
That's fine. And then thicknesses as well. So,
yes.
Now when you're rolling, it's not as critical because when you're spraying, you can go over thick.
Yes,
and you could go under thickness as well.
And that's when you get the entrapment of the solvent, is it?
Well, that's if you're going on too soon.
Right, okay, rather than too thick.
Yeah, that's right. But you can always use the wet film gauge, and really how these work is that we might have the area.
Hang on, I'll just.
Where these will be the wet film thicknesses here. So if we're going to apply this at somewhere around the 200 mark.
Yep, this is microns, is it?
This is microns.
Yep, okay.
And with the anti-foul, so we'll put that in. If we had about 200 if it came up to about the 200 mark,
yes.
and we know our anti-foul or our epoxy primer is about 50% volume solids, 50% paint, 50% thinners, that evaporates. If we had about 200, we would have 100 dry film.
Right, dry film,
microns
gotcha. Once the solvents have come out of the paint, gotcha.
And then you'll go, how much protection should we have on the steel below the waterline? And we might say 300 to 400 microns.
Yep.
That might be 3 or 4 coats.
Right.
And you'll know what sort of thickness you've
Gotcha, right, okay.
Not, doesn't have to be as high out of the water.
Out of the water, okay.
It'll be at least 150 microns of epoxy that will be on there for protection.
No, that's actually really interesting, because I must admit, as an amateur, I just think, 3 coats, rather than going, no, this is the thickness I need, this is the thickness I'm achieving, this tells me how many coats. It's much more scientific than my approach.
That's right, and that's the way to work out the thicknesses that are going.
And so how does the gauge actually work? So when you press it in, what happens? Do you press it or you hold?
Yeah, so it'll go in back to the substrate.
Yep.
And although that looks like it's in a straight line,
it's actually,
it's graduated there.
Yep.
So it'll come up and
you'll see where it touches the actual main body of the gauge.
That's right.
Yeah.
So if we were looking for 200 wet, well, we can see it jumps from 178, 203, 229, but it may come up to there, but it won't go any further. So we'll know we're in that region.
In that range, yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, excellent. And then you find out how much volume it loses as it dries, and then
and the data sheet will tell you how much.
Tell you that as well. It tells you everything. Yeah.
A lot of these things, if they're around the 50% mark, it makes the job easier.
Yep.
And
it makes it simple.
If 200's going on, it'll leave 100.
It'll leave 100 microns there.
Yeah.
Okay.
And that'll be typical of the high build that's going on. Typical of the anti-foul.
Right. Okay. All right. That's good to know. So. Going to the epoxy, then we'll go straight on to barrier coat and the polyurethane. Now polyurethane, we were talking, so polyurethane, this one I've got my, where are we? This is the one I've gone for, which is Endless Blue, which I think is comparable to the colour that's already on the boat. So obviously a 2-part paint again, but you were saying the benefits of a polyurethane over an epoxy paint were to do with UV resistance mainly?
Oh, that's right. So we could just leave the epoxy as is. It's got the durability, but it will chalk in sunlight. It'll change colour.
Yep.
Like if it was white, it would go yellow very quickly in a couple of months.
Yep.
So we're putting the epoxy in there as the protection.
Yeah.
And the polyurethane for the UV stability.
The colour and the UV and the aesthetics sort of thing. Yeah.
Loss retention.
Yep. And whereas the barrier coat's really what's keeping moisture away from the steel, right?
That's right. Yeah.
All right.
And the system that we're using on the steel too, typical system we'd also use on fiberglass.
Right, so same.
Or aluminium.
Yep. Okay, other than the anti-foul for aluminium.
Exactly.
Yeah, okay, no worries. Yeah. All right, perfect. Well, I think I've got a plan now, so thank you very much.
Rightio.
Appreciate your time again.
Thanks,
thank you. Australian spiders. We're cleaning the deck up today. I've got Thomas from Pitwater helping me out today. So Thomas is just going to take the drain valves for the fuel tanks off so that we can get under there and paint the hull under there. Once they're out, we might have to take this crossover pipe, the fuel pipe, out too. We'll have a look. Although there's a bit of clearance there, just so we can get in and clean and paint this whole engine bay. Under here, Thomas has removed the engine mounts, which we've laid out here in order so we can remake some new ones using these as the base heights. And now Thomas is having a little scrape getting the old gasket off the fuel tanks, because we need to get the fuel tanks resealed before we can do any blasting in the engine bay. Thomas is rapidly realising how annoying this old wet exhaust is as he scrapes the old gasket off the fuel tank. So what's the big stuff like? This is the old gasket. So the plan is to get these cleaned up so we can seal them before blasting in here. So we're going to have to clean inside the fuel tanks and then wipe them all with diesel as well to stop them corroding. I'll go find the old fuel tank covers because we're going to get those sandblasters, so we'll dig those out too. We're going up to the sandblasters today, so what I'm going to take is the lazarette hatch, the engine cover, then somewhere around here, here we go. I've decided I'm actually going to take the fuel hatches get them blasted and get them repainted as well. While we're making the trip, it's probably a good idea to get the rudder sandblasted, then I'll just get some epoxy on that as well. Yesterday Thomas did a great job of helping clean up the engine bay. We're going to get that ready for painting. The hatches are off at the sandblasters, getting sandblasted, along with the actual main engine hatch here and the lazarette hatch. So part of getting ready to paint in here was removing the engine mounts, which are now laid out in the position they came from. So I'm going to get the calipers, I'll measure each one, and then I'm going to make them up at home so we can install them. It looks like these weren't cast in situ. It looks like they were cast on a bench because they're all actually on a base plate. And then the bolt coming up was cast into it. You can see the head of the bolt here. So I think I'm actually just going to make 4 like this as well. I did actually try to buy 4 engine mounts that were a bit more kind of, you know, modern design, but I couldn't get any this low. Like they'd all say minimum height was about sort of 70 or 80 mil, whereas these are only about 40. My option to buy modern sort of isoflex mounts or that kind of thing, certainly something adjustable would have been really nice. But my only option to do that would be to either modify the engine mounts. Here come the mad pterodactyls again. So my option would be to modify the engine mounts to make them higher, or cut the rail down lower. And, you know, let's be honest, these chock fast orange mounts lasted 30 years, you know, so, and they actually only broke when I was messing around getting the engine out and everything, so they were actually fine. So I'm just going to make up 4 more of these, and then once the engine bay is painted and the rails are painted again, we'll reinstall them loosely, and then we'll get ready to drop the motor in and align it. So I'll just give myself a bit of orientation, and this is starboard quarter, so we'll call this 47.7 millimeters. Now this timber one is 37.5, but I can't remember whether that was packed up with something. I'll actually have to watch the removal video to see. So starboard shoulder, starboard bow is 42.8 millimeters, and port bow is 44 millimeters. So I've got to suspect that this timber one maybe did have some steel packing it up, although the bolt length isn't particularly long either. We can compare them. It's actually shorter than this one, so I doubt it was packed up by much, if at all. Let's go have a look inside, see if there's any clues to what's going on there. .210 to the bottom of the rail. 210 to the bottom of the rail. Say 150 to the top. Yeah, 145. So it looks like this rail is higher than this one. So this steel here on the top is 13 millimeters. This steel here is 10 millimeters as well. So I'm guessing they made 4 engine mounts, realised this side was way too high, and swapped it out for that block of timber to bring it down. So given that, my plan is to make 4 chock fast mounts that are all the old existing heights. I will watch the video I made on removing the engine though, just to have a look how much there was in the way of shimming in all the corners. Yes, I should have put them all in Ziploc bags and labelled them by corners and all this kind of thing, but to be honest with you, my original plan was to put adjustable mounts in, which is why I didn't really worry about it. And it's only now that's turned out to not be possible that I'm wishing I had. Hindsight's a wonderful thing. Okay, now although I'm leaving this welded infrastructure in place for the wet exhaust for now, I'm going to take this hose, this flexible hose, off just to get it out of the way. Then we'll look at removing, servicing this pump, get this hose out of the way just so we can get in and clean the rail up for painting. Also have to get that last seacock out so we can service that as well. This hose that fed water into the old wet exhaust is just attached here with a steel band, so we'll cut that off. Then for now I think I'll just take the hose clamp off here and we'll get that out. I think it's good the way the hose chosen was just a little bit too short. You can see how rusty this bracket is for this pump. I'll undo these bolts, undo the hose clamp, we'll get that off. We'll get it on a bench and give it a service. So you can see here, in order to tension the pulley belt, this bracket's slotted, but of course the only movement you've really got is this tiny bit of flexible hose here, which looks like it's under compression at the moment, so pretty average setup all up. From a tensioning point of view, I think having a flexible 90-degree hose here, something just, find a car with a radiator hose that has that 90-degree bend, it's pretty generic. That would make it much easier to tension it rather than just this short section here that's straight. Alright, let's also take the flexible section of this exhaust out, just to give myself a bit more access. Plus, this is where the dry exhaust is going to go, so let's just get it out of the way. Looks like it's solid for quite a way along here. I doubt this stuff's too expensive. I think I might just do a shallow angle guide cut along it, separate it. Looks like it's actually been tack welded on the back, oddly enough. If you squint, it looks like I'm wearing safety glasses. Alright, gone. Now, of course, the new Stilsons I bought that were big enough to get these off I've left at home, so I'm actually going to try and take this valve out, see if we can slide it out, because I want to get that home to service with the others. Then I'll bring the Stilsons back tomorrow. I'll use this nitrile rubber at home to make new gaskets. I've got heaps left. I'm starting to decide against wet blasting in the engine bay because I've got 3 bags of garnet, which is nowhere near enough to do the whole bay, and it's reasonably expensive and it's going to make a god-awful mess. So my plan is just to brush it everywhere using, got one grinder set up with a cut brush, one at an angle, a little bit rusty but it'll come clean, then just a hand brush, got a flat disc on another grinder, and a pad like this on the drill. So I think between these 5 different tools we should be able to get to everywhere. My plan then is that I've taken all the sooty stuff off, all the loose stuff. Then I'm going to do the phosphoric acid on any rusty areas, let that set, give it another brush, obviously vacuum, all that kind of stuff, and then probably do a sugar soap wash everywhere, let it dry, and then just put some epoxy on it. You know, I think it's going to be, well, it's going to be 100 times better than it is now, and you know, I'm just sort of running out of budget to pay someone to properly sandblast or anything like that. So I think we'll just do the best we can, get some paint on it, a couple of coats of paint, and I think it'll be right for plenty of years, particularly given we're going to be managing the salt water coming into the boat. So I'm going to definitely block this up here so that anything dripping from the stern gland here will end up sort of in a contained area here, get pumped out by a separate bilge pump. Then under the motor here I'm going to put some padding just to catch the oil. I don't know how this is going to go, it's going to take a while and we'll see what it looks like at the end. But just mask, respirator, earmuffs, hours. We'll go. We'll see how it goes. Decided before pushing on with the rest of this engine bay that I'm just going to sit down in the wheelhouse for a while and enjoy a nice 7-course meal. Good way to relax. And to think it was so easy to prepare. Cheers. It's a good thing about none of my clocks working. I always go, oh, I'll go back to work in 5 minutes. Once I've done the clean down with acetone, primarily to get rid of this diesel now, I'm going to brush on the phosphoric acid, which will convert the rust to a black sort of magnetite type stuff. But phosphoric acid also acts as a bit of a paint stripper. Once all that's done, my plan is to go over the whole thing with a random orbital sander with some 40 grit discs on it. Just giving the walls a bit of an acetone wash now. While I'm here, I'm just having a look at how clean I need to get this stern tube. I can see there's still built up old gunk or whatever in there. This here is a brand new stuffing box that Porter's made for me to go into the stern tube, and it doesn't go in, I mean it's bloody close, but I just need to clean it up a little bit more to make sure it slides in before we can put our prop shaft in and new packing and all that kind of stuff. And hopefully see here it's quite raised and this stuff actually chips off, so I'll chip the bulk of it off, then I'll get the wire wheel inside here and clean it up some more. What I think I'd really like to get in there is some sort of cylinder hone or something even, so I've got to go down the road this afternoon and get a few other things, so I might see if I can get one just to put in there, either a traditional 3-stone or a Dinglewall hone or something like that. I think it's worth buying because I'll use it up here, but I'll also use it at the other end where the new bearing needs to go in, because I've test fit that and it's also too tight, so both ends need cleaning out. Decided to take a trip to the scrapyard to look for some lead and some exhaust parts. Looks like all car exhaust stuff here. Aha, lead ingots already made. Let's see how much they are. On the way back from picking up that lead, I'm now just stopping into Hornsby Sandblasting. Good Good bloke Matt, so known him for a few years. And here's our lazarette, engine cover, rudder, and 2 fuel tank hatches. A few other bits and pieces are already back in the car. This is Matt's sandblasting booth. Nice serious unit, plenty of room. Funny I could get the whole trawler in here, that'd be cool. Oh, Pooch, you can say hello on vid too. Here you go.
That's the boss.
That's the boss. Thank you, Matthew.
No worries.
All right, mate.
Stu.
Appreciate
Thanks
it.
very much.
Kind of wishing this wasn't made out of steel. I bought the matching lead ingots that they had at the scrapyard, $3 a kilo, so it's not cheap. I also bought this round one. I'm going to drill through the centre and make a floating deployable buoy for diving and searching, etc. So that's what that one's for. The lazarette hatch has some serious rust spots in it, so I'll do a little bit of pad welding before we paint this one up. Matt did mention that it was starting to, do this black spotting already, how quickly, and he was like, oh, I'll go over it again for you. And I was like, nah, it's cool, mate, don't worry. You should see the rest of the boat. Matt comes from a panel beating background and doing sort of prestige car restorations, so he's used to customers who really want things to be perfect. The trawler doesn't need that, but it's a hard habit for him to break. Interesting though, I was talking to Matt while I was there, I saw a door from a car that he had some chemical paint stripper on. And I said, oh, do you always paint strip before you sandblast? He said, no. He said, this has got multiple layers of paint, old car. And he said, if you keep hitting it a lot, sandblasting puts so much heat into the metal, you can actually get it to glow red and distort the metal. So thin metal from cars, you can be really careful not to heat it so much that it distorts, otherwise you end up with a wave in it. So it's interesting to see the experience he's got with dealing with really delicate jobs. He says it's quite a luxury in some ways working with 4 mil of steel because you can just go for it. Interestingly, this is the stainless rudder. Doesn't look significantly different from the mild steel once it's been blasted. Anyway, we're going to prime all of this. The manifold was the darkest one. Actually, this is the one he had back in the booth saying, I'll redo it for you now that it's sort of spot rusted. I said, oh, look, mate, don't worry. I'll put a bit of phosphoric acid on it if I need to. I believe the epoxies I'm using on the hull would just melt if I put them on here. So we'll be putting the Detroit diesel engine block enamel, the Alpine green, straight onto this. I think it'll be fine, given what the motor looks like. It's going to be the nicest bit. Mate of mine, Doran. Wave, Doran. He's just here for a little while, so we're going to try and take the concrete out from the bilge so that I can, get in there and paint there properly. What I'm going to do is just get an air chisel, see if I can break enough off these blocks just to get them past the lips on the flanges where they're stuck and pull them out. Ow. Oh, thank you. Yeah, it's looking alright. primer's finished now, so this morning we're going to be putting some of the barrier coat on. So another 2-part epoxy product. I'm going to mix the whole lot of this up because we're going to be doing the whole hull and then also the rudder, the hatches, all that kind of stuff as well. It's now Sunday morning and I'm going to head out to the boat and put the second coat of barrier coat on, of the undercoat. That way, you know, that's sort of done. It's sunny today, which is nice. Then I'll be ready to start doing the polyurethane tomorrow morning. So, getting there. I was actually hoping to wrap this video up with everything fully painted, but, you know, didn't quite get there. So I figure if I put a second coat of the barrier coat on, it'll look nice. Nice way to finish. High tide, so I'm just going to go to the trawler by boat. I figure actually I'll just film the whole journey up there so you get a sense of the distance between the island and where the trawler is actually living. Actually, as the crow flies, it's very short, but when they built the railway line here, they didn't build it as a bridge. The trawler is actually just over there, but you've got to go right round Long Island and back up this end to get there. Bit of a shame, never mind. Anyway, let's go get this painting done. You know what painting looks like, so I'm just going to put this second coat on now and I'll show you the end result. So here's the result at the end of the second barrier coat. I'm going to do one more, but I'll be doing that one once I've got the anti-foul and the polyurethanes ready to go on, because as Dave was saying, we want to get that coat on maybe say 4 hours after the barrier coat's gone on, so they get a good chemical bond. All right, well, thanks for watching. Next week, we'll definitely be getting into servicing the Detroit diesel, which we'll be doing in between coats of the urethane and the anti-foul. All right, take care. I'll catch you then. See ya.